For years, the public record has suggested that the story was already written. Arrests were made, charges were filed, courtrooms filled with documents, headlines declared conclusions. And yet, beneath the surface of official findings, there remained a quieter narrative, one defined not by what was proven, but by what was never fully examined. According to records, the investigations into Jeffrey Epstein were extensive, spanning jurisdictions, agencies, and decades. They produced timelines, witness statements, plea agreements, and sealed files. But they also produced gaps, places where inquiries slowed, leads that were narrowed rather than expanded, questions that were formally acknowledged, then quietly set aside. Reports suggest that from the earliest complaints, the scope of inquiry was carefully controlled. Initial investigations focused on individual acts, specific victims, and localized offenses. What they did not fully pursue was the larger architecture surrounding those acts. The network of relationships, the flow of money, the repeated access to power, and the systems that allowed the same patterns to continue uninterrupted for years. According to court filings, Epstein was not operating in isolation. Travel records, financial documents, and witness testimony indicate frequent interaction with prominent individuals across business, politics, academia, and entertainment. Yet, investigators often treated these connections as background details rather than central lines of inquiry. Names appeared in logs, then disappeared from official narratives. Documents indicate that certain witnesses described environments where influence was understood without being spoken, locations where assumptions of immunity shaped behavior. According to some accounts, the expectation was not that nothing could happen, but that nothing would stick. This belief, whether justified or not, appears repeatedly in private correspondence and third-party statements reviewed later. As the years progressed, legal outcomes reinforced this perception. The 2008 non-prosecution agreement, according to records, was unusually broad. It shielded not only Epstein, but also unnamed associates. Legal scholars later questioned its scope, noting that such agreements are rare and typically require extraordinary justification. The justification, however, remained largely unexplained to the public. Reports suggest that victims were not informed in advance. Court documents confirm that many learned of the agreement only after it was finalized. This omission later became a focal point of legal challenges, but by then, the window for broader accountability had already narrowed. What investigations did not reach was not merely a list of names. It was the structural question of how influence operates within legal systems, how discretion is exercised, how priorities are set. According to former officials interviewed years later, investigative resources are finite and decisions must be made. But those decisions, when consistently favoring containment over expansion, create patterns that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Financial records offer another layer of unanswered questions. Epstein's wealth, while substantial, was often described in vague terms. According to filings, his role shifted between money manager, consultant, and intermediary. Yet, there is limited public documentation explaining the full origins of his fortune or the identities of all beneficiaries of his financial arrangements. Reports suggest that offshore structures played a significant role. Shell companies, trusts, and layered accounts appear in leaked documents and investigative journalism. These mechanisms, while legal in many contexts, complicate transparency. They also complicate accountability, particularly when investigations remain narrowly focused on criminal acts rather than financial ecosystems. Flight logs became one of the most discussed artifacts. According to records, they documented repeated travel involving politicians, business leaders, and other high-profile figures. Investigators acknowledged these logs, but emphasized that presence alone did not imply wrongdoing. The statement is legally accurate. Yet, critics argue that it sidestepped a deeper question. Why so many influential individuals repeatedly entered the same orbit without sustained scrutiny? What remains largely unexplored is the role of intermediaries. According to witness statements, Epstein rarely approached institutions directly. Instead, he relied on fixers, advisors, and social brokers. Individuals who arranged meetings, smoothed introductions, and normalized access. These figures often operated in gray zones, where their actions were not overtly illegal, but were essential to maintaining the system. Documents indicate that some institutions conducted internal reviews after Epstein's arrest. Universities, foundations, and research organizations examined donations and associations. Many issued statements distancing themselves, but few released comprehensive findings. Internal conclusions, if they exist, remain private. Reports suggest that reputational risk management often took precedence over full disclosure. Legal departments advised silence. Boards emphasized closure. The result was an appearance of resolution without complete transparency. Media coverage also played a role. Early reporting was sporadic and localized. According to journalism reviews, major outlets initially treated the case as a regional scandal rather than a national or international issue. This framing influenced public perception and, by extension, political urgency. When coverage intensified years later, much of the narrative focused on Epstein himself, his psychology, his lifestyle, his death. While these elements captured attention, they also functioned as a narrowing lens. The system around him faded into the background once again. According to official statements, multiple agencies reviewed potential co-conspirators. Some investigations remain open. Others were closed without charges. The criteria for these decisions have not been fully disclosed. Legal standards require evidence beyond association, but the absence of transparency fuels speculation. Reports suggest that intelligence agencies were aware of Epstein earlier than publicly acknowledged. References to classified briefings and confidential assessments appear in secondary accounts. These references have not been confirmed or denied in detail, leaving another area of uncertainty. What investigations did not reach was the question of leverage. According to some analysts, Epstein's access created opportunities for influence that extended beyond criminal activity. Invitations, introductions, favors, and information exchanges form a currency of power that is difficult to quantify but deeply impactful. Documents indicate that Epstein positioned himself as a connector, someone who could open doors. This role, according to social network analysis, amplifies influence without requiring formal authority. It also creates dependencies that discourage scrutiny. Silence, in this context, becomes an active force. According to sociological studies, powerful networks often rely less on overt coercion and more on mutual restraint. Everyone knows something. No one says everything. Investigations that focus solely on explicit acts miss this dynamic entirely. After Epstein's death, official inquiries concluded that no further testimony would be forthcoming from him. This was presented as a closure point, but for many observers, it marked the beginning of a deeper absence. A central figure was gone, taking with him explanations that were never fully demanded. Records show that evidence was seized: digital files, hard drives, documents. The extent of what was analyzed, released, or withheld remains unclear. Some materials were entered into court records. Others remain sealed. The criteria for sealing have not been fully explained. Victims' advocates argue that the investigative lens remained too narrow, that focusing on individual harm without examining enabling systems allowed similar dynamics to persist elsewhere. According to advocacy reports, patterns seen in the Epstein case mirror those in other elite abuse scandals, where accountability stops short of institutional examination. International dimensions further complicate the picture. Epstein's activities crossed borders. Properties, accounts, and associates spanned multiple countries. International cooperation, according to law enforcement experts, is inherently complex. Jurisdictional boundaries create delays, gaps, and opportunities for avoidance. Documents indicate that some foreign inquiries were initiated, then quietly dropped. Reasons given include insufficient evidence, jurisdictional limits, or prioritization of domestic cases. These explanations may be valid, but their cumulative effect reinforces the sense of unfinished inquiry. As years pass, the archive grows colder. Witness memories fade. Documents become harder to trace. Statutes of limitation expire. According to legal analysts, time itself becomes a shield, not through intention, but through inertia. What remains is a record defined as much by absence as by presence. Files that exist but are inaccessible. Questions that were acknowledged but not pursued. Connections that were noted but not mapped. Investigations, by design, operate within constraints. They require evidence, jurisdiction, and authority. But history shows that transformative accountability often begins when those constraints are challenged rather than accepted. According to historical precedent, major scandals rarely reveal their full scope through initial inquiries. It is only later, through independent review, declassification, or whistleblower testimony, that broader truths emerge. Whether such a moment will occur here remains unknown. The Epstein files, as they exist publicly, tell a partial story. They document crimes, failures, and consequences. But they do not fully illuminate the ecosystem that allowed those crimes to persist. That ecosystem, defined by power, access, and silence, remains largely intact. Reports suggest that the most consequential questions were never about what happened, but about how it was allowed to happen, repeatedly, in plain sight, without sustained interruption. Investigations addressed outcomes. They did not fully confront processes. In the absence of definitive answers, speculation fills the void. This speculation, while understandable, risks obscuring the more uncomfortable reality: that systems can fail without conspiracy, and that influence can operate without explicit coordination. According to records, many individuals acted within legal boundaries while contributing to an environment of impunity. This distinction complicates moral judgment and legal accountability alike. What investigations did not reach is not a single hidden truth, but a layered one. A truth about how modern power functions, how accountability can be negotiated, how silence is maintained not through force, but through mutual benefit and shared risk. As time continues, the question is not only what will be revealed, but what will remain permanently out of reach. Some files may never be opened. Some testimonies will never be given. Some connections will remain speculative. Yet the significance of the unanswered questions persists. They shape public trust. They influence how future cases are perceived. They determine whether silence is seen as an anomaly or as a pattern. According to observers, the legacy of the Epstein investigations is not closure, but uncertainty. An uncertainty that serves as a reminder that official conclusions do not always equate to complete understanding. The story, as it stands, is unfinished. Not because evidence is entirely absent, but because inquiry stopped where it became most uncomfortable. And in that stopping point lies the true boundary of what investigations did not reach.